There is something about Keanu Reeves that makes you stop and think. Not because of the movies, not because of the fame, but because of the way he carries himself through this world. Here is a man who has faced unimaginable loss, who has walked through storms that would have broken most people, and yet he still chooses kindness every single time. He does not chase the spotlight. He does not demand attention. He simply lives with a quiet grace that reminds us all what it means to be truly human. And that is why his story inspires me. Not the Hollywood version, but the real one. The one where a man who has every reason to close his heart decides to keep it open. Today I want to share a story about something that happened between Keanu and the artist Alexandra Grant. It is a story about creativity, about invisible people, and about the kind of kindness that changes everything without ever asking for credit. I promise you, by the end of this story, you will see the world a little differently. The air felt different that evening. It was one of those quiet Los Angeles nights where the sky seemed to hang lower than usual, heavy with clouds that had not yet decided whether to cry. Somewhere in a small corner of the city, tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore, a little community art center sat with its lights still on. The light from inside spilled onto the wet sidewalk in soft golden squares, and if you stood still long enough, you could hear music playing faintly from behind the old wooden door. It was the kind of place most people walked past without noticing. The kind of place that existed on the edge of disappearing. And yet, for the people inside that room, it was the only place in the world where they felt like they belonged. A man in a dark hoodie walked slowly down the sidewalk toward that door. His hands were in his pockets, his head slightly bowed, and there was something in the way he moved that told you he was not in a hurry to get anywhere. He was not running from something. He was searching for something. Something he could not name. For months now, Keanu had felt a strange emptiness settling inside him like fog. It was not sadness exactly. It was more like silence. The kind of silence that fills a room after someone leaves it for the last time. He had recently lost a close friend, and since then the world had felt muted. Colors seemed duller. Laughter seemed distant. He could smile when people expected him to smile, but inside, something had gone quiet. He did not tell anyone about this. He never did. He just kept moving forward, hoping that one day, something would crack through the numbness and let him feel again. He pushed open the door of the art center and stepped inside. The room was warm and smelled like paint and old wood. About 15 people sat at tables scattered around the space, and none of them looked up when he entered. They were too focused on what they were doing. Keanu noticed an older woman in the back adjusting a canvas for a man who was struggling to hold his brush. He noticed a teenage girl sitting alone, staring at a blank page with an intensity that seemed too heavy for someone her age. And at the front of the room, standing beside a table covered in jars of paint and scattered pencils, was Alexandra Grant. She was not performing. She was not lecturing. She was simply present, moving between the tables, whispering encouragement, touching a shoulder here, nodding there. Keanu found a chair in the back corner and sat down without a word. What he did not know yet was that this was no ordinary art class. The people in this room were not art students. They were homeless veterans trying to find a reason to wake up tomorrow. They were teenagers from the foster care system who had never been told that their voice mattered. They were elderly men and women with dementia, slowly losing their grip on the memories that made them who they were. This room was their sanctuary. And the woman who had built it, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret, had poured every last dollar of her savings into keeping those lights on. What no one knew, not even Alexandra, was that Margaret had been sleeping in the supply closet for the past 3 weeks because she could no longer afford her apartment. She had given everything to this place. Everything. Alexandra stood at the front of the room and spoke in a voice so gentle it barely rose above the hum of the rain outside. She said, "I want you to try something tonight. Do not create something beautiful. Create something true. That is all. Just be honest with your hands. Let them say what your mouth cannot. The room went still for a moment. Then, slowly, hands began to move. Brushes touched canvas. Pencils scratched paper. And something shifted in the air. It was as if the room itself took a breath. Keanu watched. A veteran named Daniel, a man with tired eyes and scarred hands, picked up a brush and painted his entire canvas black. Pure black. And then, with one slow trembling stroke, he dragged a line of white paint down the center. A single crack of light through darkness. He set the brush down and stared at it, and his jaw tightened the way a man's jaw tightens when he is trying not to cry. Across the room, the teenage girl, Diana, wrote one single sentence on her blank page. She stared at it for a long time, and then her shoulders began to shake, and she pressed her hands over her face and sobbed quietly. No one rushed to fix it. No one told her to stop. Alexandra simply sat beside her and let her cry. And in the far corner, an elderly man named Henry, who most days could not remember his own name, began shaping a piece of clay with his fingers. Slowly, carefully, he formed a hand. A hand reaching upward. And then something happened that made everyone in the room stop breathing. Henry whispered a name. His wife's name. A name he had not spoken in over a year. He remembered. Just for a moment, just for a few precious heartbeats, the fog in his mind parted and he remembered the woman he loved. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain tracing lines down the window. Keanu felt something break open inside his chest. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was like ice cracking on a river at the end of winter. He felt his eyes sting, and for the first time in months, he did not try to push it away. He let it come. After the session ended and people began to slowly gather their things, Keanu walked over to Alexandra. He stood there for a moment, not sure what to say. Then he asked her quietly, "How do you do that? How do you unlock that in people?" Alexandra looked at him, and there was a warmth in her eyes that had nothing to do with recognition. She did not treat him like a celebrity. She treated him like a man standing at the edge of something important. She said, "Creativity is not a talent, Keanu. It is the last honest language humans have. When everything else is taken away, money, memory, dignity, creativity remains. It does not ask you to be good. It asks you to be present." Those words landed somewhere deep inside him, in a place he had been protecting for months, and he felt something shift. Like a door opening in a room he thought had no doors. That night, Keanu learned the truth about the art center. It was going to close. In 48 hours, the landlord had already signed a deal with a developer to tear down the building and put up condominiums. Margaret had fought as hard as she could, but the money had run out, and no one with power seemed to care about a tiny room full of invisible people making art that would never hang in a gallery. Keanu's first instinct was to write a check. He could afford it. He could solve this problem before morning. But when he told Alexandra, she stopped him. She said, "Money saves buildings. It does not save this. We need something the city cannot ignore. We need people to see what happens in this room. We need them to feel it." Together, they came up with a plan. In 48 hours, they would take every piece of art created in that room and display it on the exterior walls of the building. A guerrilla exhibition. No gallery. No invitation. No permission. Just truth, hung on a wall for anyone walking by to witness. The art of the invisible, made visible. But nothing about the next 48 hours was easy. The landlord heard about the plan and threatened legal action. He called Margaret and told her that if a single piece of art touched the outside of his building, he would have everyone arrested. Then the weather forecast changed. A major storm was heading directly for Los Angeles, scheduled to hit on the exact night of the exhibition. And then the worst blow came. Margaret collapsed. The weeks of sleeping on a hard floor, the stress, the heartbreak of watching her life's work crumble, it all caught up with her. She was rushed to the hospital, and when Keanu arrived at her bedside, she looked so small and so tired that it hurt to look at her. She grabbed his hand and whispered, "Do not let them think they were invisible. Please. Do not let them disappear." Keanu promised her. But the next morning, 3 of the veterans came to him and said they could not do it. They were afraid. Not of the rain, not of the landlord, but of being seen. Their whole lives, they had survived by staying invisible. Being noticed meant being judged. Being known meant being vulnerable. And vulnerability was something they had learned a long time ago could get you hurt. The plan was falling apart. Keanu did not know what to say. And then Diana, the 16-year-old girl from foster care, the one who had written a single sentence and cried, stood up in the middle of the room and spoke. Her voice was shaking, but her words were steady. She said, "We have survived being invisible our whole lives. Being seen cannot be worse than that." The room went silent. And one by one, the veterans sat back down. The night of the exhibition arrived, and so did the storm. Rain came down in heavy silver sheets, turning the streets into rivers of reflected light. Keanu, Alexandra, Diana, Daniel, and every single person from the art center stood outside in the downpour, hanging artwork on the walls of the building. Their hands were shaking from the cold. Their clothes were soaked through. But no one stopped. Painting after painting went up. The written words. The clay hand. Daniel's black canvas with its single crack of white. Everything was there. Everything was true. And then something happened that no one expected. The rain did not destroy the art. It transformed it. The colors began to run and bleed into each other, creating new patterns, new shapes, new meanings. The words smeared into abstract emotion. Daniel's white crack spread across the black like lightning splitting open a night sky. Henry's reaching hand glistened under the streetlights as if it were alive. The rain did not wash away the truth. It made it louder. People began to stop. Cars pulled over. Pedestrians stood on the sidewalk with their mouths open, rain streaming down their faces, unable to look away. Phones came out, not to film a celebrity, because no one even recognized Keanu in his soaked hoodie. They filmed the art. They filmed the truth. Within an hour, the sidewalk was packed. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder in a storm, staring at the raw unfiltered pain and hope of people they had never met. And they felt it. They felt every single brushstroke. Then the landlord arrived. His face was tight with anger, his phone already in his hand, ready to call the police. He pushed through the crowd, shouting that this was his property, that these people had no right. But then he stopped. Because standing in the rain, smiling up at a small painting of a yellow bird on a branch, was his mother. His elderly mother. A woman deep in the grip of dementia. A woman he had not seen smile in over 2 years. She was in the program. He did not know. He had never asked. He had never visited. And here she was, standing in the rain, looking at something she had made with her own hands, and she was radiant. The landlord's phone dropped to his side. His shoulders fell. And the anger drained from his face like water running off a roof. He stood there for a long time, watching his mother. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out the contract with the developer, and tore it in half. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun came through the clouds in long golden beams, and the city smelled like rain and new beginnings. Keanu sat on the wet curb outside the art center with Alexandra. They each held a cup of coffee, and neither of them spoke for a while. The street was quiet. The art on the walls was still there, faded and streaked and more beautiful than anything either of them had ever seen in a museum. Finally Keanu said, "You told them that creativity is the last honest language. But you left something out." Alexandra looked at him. He said, "It is also the first act of kindness. Because it tells another person that their pain is worth witnessing." Alexandra smiled, the kind of smile that starts slow and reaches all the way to the eyes. She said, "That is the part one was hoping someone would finish for me." Later that morning, Margaret returned from the hospital. She walked through the door of her art center, the art center she had given everything to save, and she found the walls freshly painted, the supplies restocked, the lights shining brighter than they ever had. And taped to the door was a handwritten note from Diana. It said, "You made us visible. Now rest. We will keep the lights on." Margaret pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel afraid. There was no press conference. There was no headline with a celebrity's name attached. The check that paid off the building had no name on it. No one ever claimed credit. And somewhere on a quiet Los Angeles street, a man in a hoodie walked alone in the morning light, his hands in his pockets, his face lifted slightly toward the sun. And he was crying. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Because he could feel again. Because a room full of invisible people and a woman who believed in the honesty of creation had reminded him that the most powerful thing a human being can do is not to achieve something great. It is to sit beside someone in their pain and say, "I see you. You are not invisible. You matter." And that is the lesson I want to leave you with today. Creativity is not about talent. It is not about skill or technique or making something worthy of a frame. Creativity is the brave and trembling act of telling the truth when the world expects you to stay silent. And kindness, real kindness, is not about grand gestures or writing large checks. It is about presence. It is about showing up for the people the world has decided to overlook and saying, "Your story deserves to be heard. Your pain deserves to be witnessed. You deserve to be seen." Keanu Reeves understood that. Alexandra Grant taught him that. And a room full of people the world had forgotten proved it to be true. The next time you walk past someone the world does not notice, stop. Look at them. Let them know they are real. Because sometimes the smallest act of seeing another human being is the most creative and the most kind thing you will ever do. And that is a truth worth remembering.